Picture the most addictive product ever sold. It has killed more people than every war in the 20th century combined. Governments banned it on planes, in offices, in restaurants, in parks. Scientists dedicated entire careers to proving how dangerous it was. Countries taxed it into near impossibility. And still, today, more than 1 billion people on Earth do it. But here is the question nobody asks, not why people smoke today, but why humans started at all, because the answer is not what you think. It is not a story about bad decisions or weak willpower or corporate manipulation. It is a story that goes back further than agriculture, further than writing, further, almost, than civilization itself. It is a story about what it means to be human, and it begins not with a cigarette but with fire. Fire is the oldest technology our species ever had. Not agriculture, not the wheel. Not language, though language is a close contender. Fire. The oldest confirmed evidence of our ancestors deliberately controlling fire comes from a site called Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Archaeologists working there found something that initially seemed ordinary, ash and charred bone. But what made it remarkable was the context. This was inside a cave, contained, sustained, intentional. The age of those remains, 1 million years. 1 million years ago, a creature that was not yet fully human, Homo erectus, our ancestral cousin, had figured out how to take fire and make it stay, to bring it inside, to live around it, and every single day after that, for 1 million years of human and pre-human history, any person who sat near that fire did one unavoidable thing. They breathed the smoke, not sometimes, every day. Smoke was not a choice our ancestors made. It was the price of warmth, of cooked food, of safety from predators in the dark. You wanted the fire, you breathed what came off it. Generation after generation, for 10,000 generations before anyone thought to call it a habit. But here is where the story takes a turn that changes everything. Not all smoke is the same. When any organic material burns, it releases a chemical mixture that depends entirely on what that material is. Wood smoke from pine is different from wood smoke from oak. The smoke from dried grass is different from the smoke from flowering plants. And certain plants, when burned, release compounds that do something wood smoke cannot do. They change how you think. They change how you feel. They interact with the human brain in ways that are, to use the most accurate scientific term available, very noticeable. The reason this is possible is something most people have never heard of, the endocannabinoid system. Your brain contains receptors, structures specifically designed to interact with certain chemical compounds. These receptors did not evolve because of cannabis. They evolved as part of a system that regulates mood, memory, appetite, pain, and dozens of other functions fundamental to survival. They were there long before any human ever saw a cannabis plant, but when cannabis burns, it releases compounds that fit those receptors the way a key fits a lock. Which means that somewhere, at some unknown point in prehistoric time, a human being sat downwind of a burning cannabis plant, not because they chose to, but because it was growing near the fire, or because it fell into the flames, or because someone threw it in without knowing what it was, and something happened to their brain that had never happened before. A feeling arrived from nowhere, a warmth, a calm, a loosening of whatever tightness the day had brought. And that human, being human, did what every intelligent creature does when something unexpected and pleasant occurs. They tried to figure out how to make it happen again. The archaeological evidence for deliberate, intentional smoking of psychoactive plants is surprisingly old and surprisingly precise. In the Pamir Mountains of Central Asia, excavations of a burial site dating to around 500 BC uncovered wooden braziers, small vessels designed specifically for burning material, alongside superheated stones and the clear chemical residue of cannabis, not wild cannabis, the kind that grows everywhere and produces little of the compound that affects the brain. This was cannabis specifically cultivated for high psychoactive content. Someone in 500 BC was not only smoking. They were farming the good stuff, but 500 BC is recent. In the context of this story, organic material almost never survives thousands of years in the ground. The wooden pipe, the leather pouch, the dried plant in the clay bowl, these things decompose. They become soil. They leave no trace for archaeologists to find. We have stone tools from 3 million years ago because stone survives. We have almost nothing of the organic material that filled the daily lives of prehistoric humans because organic material does not survive. So when we say the oldest direct evidence dates to 500 BC, we are not saying it started in 500 BC, we are saying that is where our surviving physical evidence begins. The behavior almost certainly goes much further back. In 2019, researchers excavating a site in the Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah dated a hearth to approximately 12,000 years ago. Inside it, the concentrated seeds of Nicotiana attenuata, a native wild tobacco species. Not scattered seeds blown in by wind, concentrated seeds, in a quantity and pattern suggesting deliberate placement into the fire. 12,000 years ago, before pottery. Before any pipe artifact has ever been found in that region. Before any written record exists anywhere in the world. Someone was putting tobacco into fire 12,000 years ago in what is now Utah. And we only know about it because this particular site's conditions happen to preserve seeds. How many other sites have not preserved theirs? How many other plants in how many other fires across how many other continents? We simply do not know. And that is the most honest answer available. Tobacco deserves its own chapter, because it is the plant most people think of first, and its story is genuinely extraordinary. Tobacco is native to the Americas. This is a fact with enormous implications. It means that every civilization in Europe, Africa, and Asia had no knowledge of tobacco whatsoever until European ships arrived in the Caribbean in 1492. The entire tobacco industry, every cigarette ever manufactured in Europe or Asia, every tradition of tobacco use outside the Americas, all of it postdates a single voyage by less than 6 centuries. When Columbus landed on those Caribbean shores, he noted in his own journal something his crew found bewildering. The indigenous Taino people carrying small bundles of dried leaves that they lit and inhaled. His crew watched. They were confused. They then, within a matter of weeks, tried it themselves, because of course they did. But what Columbus witnessed was not the beginning of tobacco use. It was the ending of a very long story. Archaeological evidence of tobacco residue in ancient pipes from the southeastern United States goes back at least 3,500 years. Some researchers, examining the agricultural history of the Amazon basin, believe it could go back 10,000 years or more. And here is the crucial point about how tobacco was used in those thousands of years before any European ever smelled it. It was not recreational. It was sacred. In indigenous cultures across North and South America, tobacco was not something you did casually. It was ceremony. It was medicine. It was a technology of the spirit, a means of communicating with forces beyond the visible world, of binding agreements with the weight of the divine, of carrying prayers upward on rising smoke where ordinary words could not reach. A shaman who smoked was not taking a break. He was doing his job. He was opening something that could not be opened any other way. When you understand smoking as sacred technology rather than casual habit, the discipline surrounding it makes complete sense. You do not chain smoke a sacred substance. You approach it with intention, with preparation, with awareness of what you are entering. The smoke was treated with the reverence it had earned over thousands of years of use. The transformation of tobacco from sacred plant to mass-market commodity happened with a speed that has no parallel in history. Within a century of arriving in Europe, tobacco was being traded globally. Within 2 centuries, it was reshaping economies, fueling the slave trade, and funding colonial empires. Within 4 centuries, industrially manufactured cigarettes had turned a ritual substance into a product specifically engineered for maximum addiction. What took indigenous Americans thousands of years to integrate into a careful, meaningful cultural practice, industrial capitalism converted into the most profitable and most lethal legal consumer product in human history within a few hundred years. The plant did not change. What we did with it did. There is a theory in anthropology that most people outside the field have never encountered, and it is worth spending time with. It is called the intoxication hypothesis, and its core argument is simple. The desire to alter consciousness is not a flaw in human nature. It is a feature. Look at the record. Across every culture ever documented by anthropology, without a single exception, humans have sought out ways to alter their mental state. Fermented beverages in ancient Mesopotamia, dating to at least 7,000 years ago. Psychedelic mushrooms in ritual use across multiple continents, with cave paintings in Algeria that some researchers believe depict mushroom consumption dating to 5000 BC or earlier. Coca leaves chewed in the Andes, kava consumed in the Pacific. Opium poppy use in Europe going back to at least 3400 BC, betel nut chewed across South and Southeast Asia for at least 4000 years. This is not a coincidence, this is a pattern. And patterns in human behavior that appear in every culture, independently, suggest something deeper than a habit. Psychopharmacologist Ronald Siegel argued in the 1980s that the drive to seek altered states of consciousness is as fundamental to animal behavior as hunger, thirst, and reproduction, not a human quirk, an animal imperative. Elephants will travel significant distances to eat fermented fruit. Certain birds eat fermented berries and then fly in erratic patterns until the effect wears off. Reindeer in Siberia have been documented consuming fly agaric mushrooms and then seeking out and drinking the urine of other reindeer who have consumed them, because the psychoactive compound survives the digestive process. Reindeer discovered chemical recycling of psychoactive compounds, independently, in the Arctic. The point is not that all of nature wants to get high. The point is that the drive to alter the state of one's own consciousness is not a uniquely human weakness. It is a biological impulse embedded deeply enough that it shows up across species, across continents, across evolutionary lineages with nothing in common but the drive itself, which means that our earliest ancestors, sitting around fires in the dark with brains not yet wired to question everything, almost certainly discovered the psychoactive properties of certain smoke not as a mistake, but as a form of intelligence. They learned what different smoke did. They passed that knowledge on. They incorporated it into ritual, into medicine, into the social fabric of group life. Speaking of group life, there is an angle to the history of smoking that almost never appears in popular accounts, and it may be the most important one. Humans survive not as individuals but as groups. Every advantage that helped a group stay together, trust each other, and act in coordination had direct survival value. Isolated humans died, groups survived. Shared ritual is one of the most powerful tools for group cohesion that evolution ever produced. And shared altered experience, the specific kind that comes from consuming psychoactive substances together, is extraordinarily good at creating the kind of deep mutual trust that makes cooperation possible. Modern neuroscience has documented this with some precision. Shared rituals synchronize neural activity between participants in measurable ways. They increase trust. They dissolve the ordinary boundaries between self and group, creating a temporary experience of collective identity that makes the group feel, at a neural level, more like one thing than many separate things. This is not mysticism. This is chemistry and brain function. When prehistoric people sat together in enclosed spaces, breathing in the smoke of psychoactive plants, and collectively entered an altered state, that was not only a spiritual experience, that was infrastructure. It was one of the mechanisms by which the social trust necessary for collective survival was built and maintained. The ritual smoke circle was not a party. It was the original team-building exercise. Let me bring this back to something concrete, because all of this history can start to feel abstract. Let's talk about medicine. One of the oldest surviving medical documents in the world is the Ebers Papyrus from ancient Egypt, dated to approximately 1550 BC. It contains detailed descriptions of therapeutic treatments using inhaled smoke, specifically for respiratory conditions, among other things. Which seems deeply counterintuitive from a modern perspective. Treating lung conditions with smoke? Yes. Because the specific herbs prescribed, henbane and certain aromatics, have genuine pharmacological properties. The ancient Egyptians were not simply confused. They had observed, over generations of clinical practice, that certain smokes produce certain effects in certain conditions. The delivery mechanism was logical given what they understood. The lungs are accessible directly via inhalation in a way that no other internal organ is. Hippocrates, who founded the tradition that produced modern medicine, wrote about therapeutic fumigation. Ayurvedic medicine from ancient India, dating back over 3,000 years, contains detailed protocols for a practice called dhampana, the deliberate inhalation of medicinal smoke through specifically designed pipes. Not casual, not recreational, a medical system with centuries of refinement, specific plants for specific conditions, specific preparations and specific protocols. We still use inhalation as a delivery mechanism for medicine today. Asthma inhalers, anesthetic gases, nebulized treatments. The lungs are still a direct pathway into the bloodstream. That logic did not originate with modern medicine. It was understood and practiced thousands of years before anyone wrote the word pharmaceutical. The smoke changed, the principle survived. And then there is the uncomfortable ending to this story. The 20th century tobacco industry represents one of the more deliberate acts of harm ever committed against a population by a commercial enterprise. Internal company documents, many of them revealed only through litigation in the 1990s, show that tobacco companies had their own scientists conducting research that conclusively demonstrated the link between cigarettes and cancer, and deliberately buried those findings for decades while continuing to market their products. They added chemical compounds specifically designed to make nicotine reach the brain faster, create stronger addiction, and leave the system more quickly, maximizing the frequency of craving. They marketed cigarettes directly to children. They hired physicians to appear in advertisements implying medical endorsement. They funded research programs specifically designed not to find truth but to create the appearance of scientific uncertainty, to give consumers and regulators enough doubt to delay action for as long as possible. The result of that delay is measured in tens of millions of deaths that were preventable, from diseases that were known to be caused by cigarettes, during years when that knowledge was being actively suppressed. The plant that was sacred to indigenous Americans for thousands of years. The smoke that ancient physicians used carefully and with reverence for its effects. The substance that was central to ritual, to healing, to social bonding across dozens of cultures for millennia. That same plant was turned, by one industry in one century, into the most efficiently deadly mass-market product ever created. The gap between a shaman placing carefully cultivated plant material into a ritual fire in 500 BC, and a tobacco executive approving a 1950s advertising campaign designed to hide the truth about lung cancer, is not a gap in time. It is a gap in moral imagination. So, when did humans start smoking? The honest answer is that we do not know. The evidence we can find points back 12,000 years with confidence, and suggests the behavior is likely far older than that. The underlying drive, the desire to alter consciousness, to use inhaled substances as medicine, to share ritual smoke as a form of social bonding, may be as old as controlled fire itself. What we can say with confidence is this: by the time any civilization in the world was old enough to leave a written record, they were already using smoke in ways that were sophisticated, intentional, and deeply integrated into medicine, ritual, and social life. It was not a new idea when the Egyptians wrote about it. It was not a new idea when the Scythians howled in their vapor tents. It was not a new idea when the Taino people on that Caribbean beach watched a confused sailor cough his way through his first experience with tobacco. It was already ancient. You live in a world shaped by 10,000 years of human decisions about fire and smoke, and what it means to sit together in the dark and share something that changes how the world feels for a little while. That impulse to gather, to breathe together, to enter something shared, is not a flaw. It is as old as the species. What we do with it is the only question that ever mattered. If this changed how you think about something you thought you already understood, you know what to do. And if you want the next video the moment it drops, you know where the subscribe button is.